YOLO Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to be talking about functional analysis. This is basically a secondary dominance part 2, as well as just secondary functions. We're going to be covering a lot of stuff in this area. This is really exciting stuff because it poses a lot of really cool questions that are actually really useful, and they provide a very deep understanding of chords. And so I want to start with just something that's sort of an interesting case. So if I'm writing a 1, and let's just start with one that we already know. So I'm expecting you to be familiar with dominant 7 chords, which was covered a ways ago in the series, and also be familiar with secondary dominants, which was covered on, I think, video 68, somewhere around there. So let's start with our basic 5 of 5. So we have a 5 of 5, 2 of 5, 2 of 1. This is a secondary dominant chord, pretty standard stuff. Its purpose is to tonicize the 5 chord temporarily so that we reach the 5 chord in a 5-1 kind of way. We know that it happens to sound very nice and smooth. And so for this reason, we make it a 5-7. And we want to tonicize our 1 chord here. And so we make this a 5-7 as well. Now the question becomes, this 5 right here, should we put a 7 next to it? Would that accurately represent what this 5 is trying to tell us? And this, I'm going to give you some more interesting examples, but this stuff's important. Like if you're going to write an analysis of something, if you're going to write a chord progression, some people I see writing chord progressions that make literally 0 sense. What they're writing will have the notes that they want, but what they actually mean to do does not line up at all with what they're actually writing down. This will become more clear as I do some more. But here, should we have a 5-7 there? The answer is no. We generally shouldn't. Some people will put it there. I think I put it there in the last video. Like there's no harm in really putting it there, but it's not really the most accurate way of what's happening. Because this 5 is here to show that we're thinking from the 5's perspective, in the 5's key. So if we write our chords here, we're going from C and then the 5-7 of 5. And we're thinking in the key of 5. We're not thinking of the 5-7 chord. We're thinking of the 5 as a key. So if we're in G major, right, because that's the 5, what is the 5-7? So we'd say that's D7. And so here it makes more sense to leave the 7 off. And this kind of stuff will open doors for you in terms of understanding if you can catch this. This is like the nuances of it. And if you can catch these things, you'll see like the logic, the clockwork of theory. And so we say, okay, D7 to a G7 to a 1, which is a C. So this is an accurate way of writing it. This would be a really good way of writing it. And I guess let's play it just so that we can hear it. It's always good to hear your examples. And then of course, we've got our chromatic right here. I'm gonna move the 7 over, and then we'll put our G in. And then we'll add our 7. This should be pretty straightforward stuff. Back to a C. We wind up with this. That was awful quick. Let's slow it down. There's a little bit of voicing in there. It's not the smoothest thing in the world. We want this to rise up, right? If we leave our leading tone hanging like that, that's like, you don't do that. So we say, okay, cool. Now let's do another example. This one I'm going to bring up will be a lot more clear, I think. This is just a kind of a refresher of secondary functions. We're looking at this. But let's say, okay, what if we have a 1 to a 4, a 5, a 4, to a 4, right? Because that's the purpose of the secondary dominant, is to tonicize the chord we're going to a 1. So we say, all right, this will be a 5-7 of a 4 because we're going to add a 7 on. You could just leave it as, some people, even if there's a 7 in there, will still just say 5 of 4 because sometimes it's almost a given that there's going to be a 7. I like to tag in the 7 though, to show that we're really making this sound like a resolution here. So now we say, all right, in this case, is this an accurate thing? Is this really what it sounds like what we're doing? Like, are we really tonicizing this 4 chord right here? We could certainly write it like this. Like, this should make sense, right? We're playing the 5 of 4, and the 5 chord has the ability to tonicize stuff. So we say, well, let's find out. Let's write in a 1 chord, and then, so let's write out our chords. So we're going from C to our mystery chord, to the 4 chord, which is F, to C. And so we say, well, if we're thinking in the key of F, right, that's why this guy is on the bottom. This is the key we're really thinking in. So we say in the key of F, the key of F has a 5 that is C. We say, wait a second, we're already playing a C. Is this really going to sound like we've tonicized F? Well, with the 7 here, it will, actually. And this is actually a fine way of saying it. But let's say that we don't put the 7 there. We just put the 5 there. Then is this an accurate way of saying it? And here we would say, I don't know, because we're still playing C. And recall this, or not recall, but just remember that this, I guess that means the same thing. It's going to be in a piece. This chord progression is not just going to be like, we're going to write it out as a solo kind of thing, but it's going to be in the context of a piece where C has been established as the key. And so if we play a C after a C, it's not really going to sound like we're resolving to F. So let's go ahead and write this out. So we have a C, another C, and then we're going to an F. Let's go ahead and write it in a blocky kind of way. And then we're going back to a C. So we have this. So it sounds like we're just going from a 1 chord to a 4 chord. Doesn't sound like we've tonicized F. Doesn't sound like we're resolving to F. And so this here wouldn't be a very good way of writing it down. It is a way you could, though. Like, you could write it like this. Now, if we add in that 7, suddenly this is better than what we were doing before, right? Before we were really doing this. This is the true picture of what's going on over here. This with just a 5, this stuff, no, that doesn't make sense. It's not really what we're doing. So we say, okay, let's put a 7 in. Our motivation for putting the 7 in is because that's going to include a B flat. Because, right, it's going to be a major chord with a minor 7, and that's going to tonicize, and it adds in that B flat that the key of F contains. So it's going to sound like we resolve. So let's give this a listen. And then we also do a little bit of voice leading. It sounds like we're reaching a 1 in a sense. Like, it's still a 4 chord because we're going to a 4 chord, but it sounds like we're resolving here. Before it didn't sound like that. Like, we listen. This doesn't sound like near the resolution as soon as we add in this B flat. That's just like this. So hopefully this is like clear. This is like a really important thing, because as you write more and more music and you begin to think in terms of these functional analysis, it's going to be really, really cool, because you'll see stuff like this and you'll be like, oh, this is why I would write it like this. I took a class where they would give us a piece of music, and sometimes composers, the composers are composing. They don't have reasons for every single thing that they do. But we, as the students, wanted to figure out how this stuff works. And so we're trying to find out ways to name the different tricks they're using, right? And so when we see stuff, we'd have to argue about why one analysis might be superior to another, or if are they equal, or we had to consider all these different things. And so this is just the tip of the iceberg on the things that can occur. Let me write for you one that's another example I think is pretty clear. So let's do a 1 to a 2 of 5. So this is just a secondary function chord. Again, not a secondary dominant. Oh, and for that reason too, just why we're still here, this is one reason why people say there's no such thing really as a 5 of 4. Because the 5 of 4 is really just a 1 chord. So you're going to hear that. Books will toss this out like they've played for you an example like I have, and they'll move on to it. From the next sentence, they'll just mention this in passing. It's somewhat frustrating when you're new. I remember being frustrated all the time by the fact that books would do stuff like this all the time. They write about music like you can hear the examples like right in front of you. It's like, what the heck, book? Come on, you got to give me a little more. So, anyways, let's jump over to another clear example. So we're going to go from a 1 to a 2 of 5, 2 of 5 to a 1. We say, is this really what's happening here? Is this a thing? And so if we write out our chords, we'd have a C and then a 2 of 5. Well, what's our 5? Our 5 is G. So what's the 2 chord in the key of G? Well, that would be A. And we'd actually end up with an A minor, the 2 of 5. And then we have a 5, which is the G, to a 1. At the beginning of this series, man, we're talking about building scales. Students oftentimes have no idea how important it's going to be later on down the line. It's like you got to be able to just think. And this is in the key of C. Man, imagine all this stuff. I wrote a 1 chord. And you also get to the point where you're thinking, when you get thinking all the keys, a 1 chord is just like, give me a key, and I will tell you what the chord progression will be. That's why this is so awesome. It's like key independent. So, all right, let's write this out. Enough jibber jabber. So we have C to A minor to G to C. We'll omit the 5th here. Whoops, haha. Sounded kind of interesting there. I just want to keep it at 3 notes each. So we omit the 5th, doesn't define the chord. The 3rd is what is the important guy here. And we need to resolve the leading tone, so that's why I choose to double the root. It's this is voice leading stuff. Pretty standard stuff here. Now, when we look at this, we say, is this going to sound like a 2 of 5? And what I should really say, is this going to sound like a 2 chord going to a 1 chord, right? Because that's what we have here. This is the 2 chord if we're pretending this is the 1 chord. That kind of a sound. So that I'm playing a D minor to C, but in this case, we're playing an A minor to G. I'm avoiding it because I want you to judge for yourself when we hear it. Is it going to sound like a 2 chord, or is it going to sound like a 6 chord, right? Because the 6 chord here, from A minor to C, we're going to go from C to A to G. That's what we're going to have. So let's listen to it. So did it sound like we were going to a 2 of 5, or did it sound like we were just doing this? 1, 6, 5, 1. You know, where are we doing that? Which one is better? Like, let's listen again. Let's even go slower. And so this is where the debate begins. People will start listing out their reasons for why one would be preferred over the other. I think most people would say this just sounds like a 1-6-5-1. It doesn't sound like this 2 of 5. Just seems like an overly complicated way to do this. And if you were given this backwards, if I gave you this and said analyze it, most people would write this down. Because thinking in secondary dominance is confusing. I certainly don't think of this as my first option. I think of this. And then the guy next to me thinks of this because he's like got more stuff done than I. He's smarter. So we say, okay, well, let's look at this. Let me give you a case where this might be a better analysis. I actually used this progression in an earlier video. I think it was in the secondary dominant video. Let's say, but this is just a secondary function chord. Again, not a secondary dominant, just a secondary function. Because we're not playing the 5 of anything. All right, so let's go 2, and let's do a 5-1. Let's finish off a chord progression and sort of like we've modulated to the key of G here for a moment. So we'll do a 2 to a 5 of 5 to a 5 of 1. So now it's like we have done a 2, 5, 1 if we're pretending that the 5 is the 1. So it's like we've modulated into the key of G for just a moment, and we don't write it. I can't write like the actual way it would look in analysis, but you'd put a little bracket, like a downward, like one of the things for piano pedals, and then you'd put G with a colon, showing that you're analyzing in G because you think that analysis should be done in the key of G. and then you'd write 2-5-1, and then you'd write a C and go back. Usually we'll use secondary notation though if it's just very temporary. Like here, we're not committing really to being in G. We're just using the chords there as a way to get to G in terms of C. Hopefully this is making sense to you. So we say, all right, what would the chords be for this guy? Well, we'd have C, again an A minor, but this time we're going to a D major. Let's make it a D7 because our purpose here is to really tonicize it up. We could even do like a sus. We could toss in all our knowledge of 5 chords. We could do a sus5 or well, let's just stick with the sus5. There's a couple other things, but I don't think I've talked about some of these yet. So there's options though. Like we could break out all kinds of additional tools here. And then we're going to the 5 chord, which is G, to 1, which is C. I was going to write a 1. And here, this is really cool because here, this is a better analysis because this is going to sound like a 2-5-1. So let's hear that. In fact, let's clone this. And all we really did though was insert this D7. So let's go to, oh my gosh, middle mouse click. I have a book like next to me and my hand's like brushing it. So I was pushing all the wrong mouse keys. So let's move this over and let's add in a D7. So we add in D, F sharp, A, C. Oh geez, I'm going to sacrifice the 3-part texture here just for simplicity so you can see all the notes. So we have our D7 and it's going to resolve to the G. And in this case, let's see if that changes our perception of this. That's kind of nice. Let's add on a 7 to the G. Let's make this a 5-7. Just because I want that pull to C to be just a tad more. So we say, all right, this could actually be empowered too by putting a G maybe in root position. That could probably do us some good. But let's do one of these. So I'm just gonna break it up and have it step down. That's a common thing. And that's really nice, and we get this nice little 4-3 in the key. So we're leveraging both the half steps that are going on here. That's nice, you know? And this is the tritone too, resolving on contrary motion. Like, yeah, this is just so good. So when we look at this, I'd like to point out, because this used to confuse me to death when I was new, was when you're analyzing a chord, how do you pick what notes you're going to include? Because usually things are broken up over time. So you're kind of, it's up to you, but you look sort of at like a window of time. And so when I write 5-7, it might start out without the 7, but we include the 7 and it serves the role as a 7. Like that's we threw in the 7 specifically for that reason. And so usually you consider the window and try and think, you know, what's the purpose here? And then you'll write what you think is happening that way. When you're writing it yourself, you know, you can just include that in there and the confusion goes down. I had a hard time when I had to look at other people's stuff and be like, oh, I'm not 100% sure what's going on here. A little bit longer and denser of a video, but it's really valuable. So let's compare this against our first one, where we said this analysis would be better suited. Adding this 2 of 5 is just, you know, hot water. Over here, though, or hot steam, I'm not sure what the expression is. And then over here, it makes sense, though, because we're working basically in a small modulation. Let's compare them. Okay. So we get that 2-5-1. That certainly changes. It sounds dramatically different. So this is just a quick little sort of introduction. And this is cool because now we can look at chords. So we can look at this progression. Like let's say we're looking at this A minor and we're saying, what are additional things we could do with this? So we might have a progression already. So then we write it out in terms of function, which we would wind up with this. And then we say, what are some things we could do maybe with this 6 chord that can make it more interesting? I know one that I'd probably think of right away and test out would be slap a 3 before it. We could think, well, what about secondary dominants? And you could think, oh, I remember the 6th chord can be viewed as a 2 of 5. And because it can be viewed as a 2 of 5, we could do a 2-5-1 and get this sort of a sound in our song instead. So you can begin to use this sort of as a method for inspiration so that when you're writing, and this is something that I've really strived to do, is build up these chord vocabularies so that I know all my options. So if I have a particular emotion I want to go after, I can do that. And it gets really fun when you get into upper structure triads or upper structure chords, period, because the textures you can get are so rich and you have so many options. It's almost like mind-boggling the number of options you have. But I hope that this just clarifies some things. If you want some exercises doing this, I'd recommend grabbing any your favorite piece and analyzing it. You work in MIDI, so this is a little unfortunate. I usually would say go get some box stuff and just go through that, analyze that. And then maybe some Chopin stuff. You'd be surprised, Chopin follows quite a number of normal rules. And every now and then he'll toss in like a spice chord. Some of his songs have a lot of spice chords, but there's quite a few of them, that follow some pretty strict rules. And then you'll see this one chord that sounds pretty modern for the time that it was written. Man was a revolutionary piano player and composer. One of my favorites. And you just see, just doing analysis can be eye-opening. It's like reading a great book. And except for it's a book that enables you to write your own book. It's like more empowering almost. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.